But let's start things off today with our college football playoff round one reactions. And let's start things out with the two games involving the group of five teams, Ole Miss and Tulane, and Oregon and James Madison. Ole Miss thumped Tulane 41-10, and Oregon won 51-34 over JMU. The Ole Miss game, obviously a blowout. The Oregon JMU game was 48-20 at the end of the third. We both expected Ole Miss and Oregon to win, as did just about everybody. But after these results, Braden, do you think that changes need to be made to the college football playoff format?
Yes, changes do need to be made to the format, but not in the way people think. The reality is that there are not 12 teams deserving of competing for a national championship in college football. Realistically, this year, I think 5 teams have a chance, and those are the top 5 seeds. If I was the commissioner of college football, here's what I would do. I would go back to the original bowl tie-ins. So you play your conference championship games, and you play all of the bowl games. And from that point, you have a 4-team playoff after the bowl games. So you get to keep kind of that tradition, the consistency of the Big Ten and the Pac-10 champion play in the Rose Bowl. Obviously, you'd have to find some substitute conference there. You have the SEC champ playing in the Sugar Bowl. You have the ACC champ in the Orange Bowl. All of that fun stuff that made college football so great when we were younger. You bring that back, and then you still get a playoff at the end of it. You get guys who are going to be playing in those bowl games. It counts as an extra non-conference data point for a lot of teams. I think it'd be really fun. However, since that won't ever happen for monetary reasons, I personally like giving the group of 5 a playoff bid every year. Sure, most of the time that team is going to be blown out. We saw that with both teams this year. We saw that with Boise State against Penn State last year. But that's also the case in March Madness, and we love having those Cinderella runs. I don't understand the obsession with wanting to squeeze out half of the FBS teams entirely from having any chance of competing for a national championship or even one singular playoff win. We've gotten too caught up in making college football the minor league version of the NFL that we're starting to lose sight of what makes it special in the first place.
And I hear where you're coming from in that regard. I feel like, though, that would be better suited for a much larger bracket than just 12 teams. Because the fact of the matter is, if you've got Tulane playing Ole Miss and James Madison playing Oregon in the first round, those teams stand no chance. So, like, if you're going to have, a group of 5 team or teams, plural, I think you need to have teams that are closer in talent. And so I think you would need to expand further if that's the case. If we're sticking with 12 teams, I absolutely think that change needs to be made. As much as I enjoyed the Notre Dame bitch and moan fest this weekend, which is exactly what it was, Ole Miss, Notre Dame, and Oregon BYU would have been far better games than what we saw with those two group of 5 teams. I can't get behind the argument of, well, we need to give these smaller schools a chance when we all knew that this was coming. If you're a top 10 team in the group of 5, absolutely, yes, you deserve a shot. Boise State last year deserved a shot. Cincinnati in 2021 deserved a shot. But Tulane was a 2-loss group of 5 team, and James Madison played one Power 4 team all year and lost by 14. So I don't like where it's at right now. I think college football needs to get rid of auto bids for group of 5 teams first and foremost. Give each Power 4 team, each Power 4 champion, an auto bid, and then just take the eight best teams after that as your at-larges. Otherwise, you're essentially giving the number 5 team, and in this case, the number 6 team as well, a free pass to the quarterfinals. And the other thing, this is not the same layout as the 4-team format where, 5 to 10 years ago, there were 2, maybe 3 teams that had a real shot every year. I'm not saying that, the number 10 team is going to make a huge run every year, but last year, the semifinals was teams 5 through 8. So I'm not saying Notre Dame and BYU would have pulled the upset in round 1, but we'll never know because 2 teams who, frankly, had no real shot got included. So I think changes need to be made. Obviously, we have a slight difference of opinions on what that looks like. But I think we're both in agreement that changes need to be made.
Yeah, I can see the argument on that side of things. I also kind of wonder, with how much of the interest the playoff committee, ESPN, kind of have in making these games, more viewable as opposed to, getting the best matchups. What happens if you get a group of 5 team that's legitimately good? They're right on that cut line, and maybe we go with let's take Boise State from last year, for example. We take maybe this year's Notre Dame team over that Boise State team. purely from a monetary standpoint because more people would want to watch Notre Dame. I think it's a slippery slope at that point, especially if you're already giving auto bids to Power Four champions. Like for example, if we don't have the Group of Five auto bids this year, we still have an 8-5 Duke team in the college football playoff. That is objectively not a good thing. And I think there's some changes that need to be made with conference tiebreakers. I would expect to see, in particular, the ACC, probably the Big 12 too, change their format. So that is going to be the top two teams in the college football playoff rankings, as opposed to the top two teams just from a conference tiebreaker standpoint that are playing in the Big 12 and ACC championships next year. I think there's a lot of concerns if we get rid of those auto bids, but keep the Power Four auto bids especially.
Well, let's pivot over to the other two games of the first round. We had Alabama against Oklahoma, and Alabama came out on top this time, 34-24. Oklahoma got out to a 17-0 lead early, and then Alabama pulled all the way back to make it 17-17 going to halftime, and then pretty much controlled the second half from there. Braden, what were your thoughts on this game?
Yeah, I was really impressed with Alabama's resiliency. We saw a similar situation against Georgia where the Crimson Tide went down big early, and in that game it kind of looked like they just laid down and died for the most part. But on Friday, they really came back and they showed some life. I also felt like Oklahoma kind of gave the game away. You had the drop snap on the punt, which ended up being blocked. John Mateer throws a pick six at the end of the first half, and then Tate Sandell, the Groza Award winner, misses 2 field goals in the fourth quarter, including a chip shot that would have made it a one-possession game late. Alabama absolutely deserves credit for overcoming a 17-0 deficit, but it's also difficult to say whether Alabama won this game or Oklahoma lost it.
Yeah, and you and I were talking about it during the game. This feels exactly like the first matchup, just kind of flipped because Oklahoma, like you said, had all those unenforced errors. You mentioned the drop putt. They had a wide open touchdown, and that would have made it 24-7. That just the receiver just didn't catch. That would have been a huge, huge play. And then obviously the pick six before the halftime. And that really got Alabama going. The second half looked much more like what we expect from Alabama. They found rhythm on offense. The defense had 4 sacks in that second half. They had a few explosive passing plays. They had an explosive run as well, which was great to see. They didn't do anything else besides that one explosive run, though. But it was 30 yards. That was their longest run since week 2, which is just ridiculous to say out loud for an Alabama team. But I'm certainly not going to say that Alabama will upset Indiana. It did feel like things got a little more corrected in that second half. And the last time Alabama beat a top 10 team on the road was Georgia earlier this year. They then rattled off 3 straight ranked wins after that. So, again, not saying Alabama's going to beat Indiana, but this is a humongous win for Alabama and a humongous win for Kalen DeBoer to give them some momentum as they enter the quarterfinal. And then the other round 1 game, Miami and Texas A&M. This game was just a slugfest. 10-3 was the final score in favor of Miami. This game was scoreless for the first 34 and a half minutes and did not have a touchdown until after the 2-minute warning of the second half. Braden, what were your thoughts from this one?
Yeah, you mentioned how ugly the game was, and that was my first thought as well. Both teams got a massive chunk of their total yardage on one singular play. Mark Fletcher had a 56-yard run for Miami on their and what ended up being their last actual drive of the game, where they were able to finally punch one into the end zone. And then Mario Craver, I think it was late-ish in the first half, had a 59-yard catch that resulted in a blocked field goal for Texas A&M. This was really a Texas 8-4 game at its finest. Marcel Reed played terribly all game, with the exception of the start of the final drive A&M had of the game, and then completely decided to just throw the game away, throwing into double coverage in the end zone on 3rd and goal. The defense looked great, but Texas A&M should not expect to win that game, putting up just 326 yards of offense and 3 points. I also was not particularly impressed with Miami, but they did find a way to win. At least not impressed with them on the offensive side of the ball. Carson Beck was in full-blown game manager mode. He really did not look like, an actual quarterback out there. He was kind of just a placeholder for the vast majority of the game. Mark Fletcher, on the other hand, looked great, but pretty much nobody else on offense could contribute. Mark Fletcher was responsible for 61.9% of Miami's total yardage in that game. On the defensive side of the ball, Ruben Bain, Keontae Scott, and Akeem Mesidor all had phenomenal games. Bain had 3 sacks, Scott had 2 sacks and 10 tackles, and then Mesidor had 1.5 sacks. If this Miami defense shows up against Ohio State, which is a much more difficult challenge, They're going to be competitive, but they need some things to get corrected on the offensive side of the ball if they're going to have any shot of winning that game.
And hey, I got to give myself a slight pat on the back because I said coming in that the matchup that will decide the game was A&M on the ground versus the Miami front seven. A&M ran for 2.5 yards per carry, and Miami had 9 tackles for loss. I said if you can make if you make Marcel Reed beat you with his arm, that's where the offense struggles. And sure enough, like you said, he did not play well and threw 2 picks. Mark Fletcher, you mentioned, had a phenomenal day. That 56-yard run set up the only touchdown of the game. But this Miami defense is legit. And Ruben Bain, who you just mentioned, was supposedly, according to an A&M offensive lineman, not going to be an issue. I think he said he had 3 sacks. I thought I saw somewhere that it was 4, but either way, that's a massive, massive game for him. Miami as a team had 7. And as much as Kalen DeBoer needed that win for Alabama, Mario Cristobal arguably needed it more for Miami than anything. So a humongous win for the Hurricanes as they will go on to face Ohio State